We are live, ladies and gentlemen. WeatherBrains episode number 569 for the 12th of December, 2016. We are less than 2 weeks away from Christmas. Where did the time go? Wow. So, got several out tonight. Brian Peters. The nice thing about Brian, I can actually track him. You see, hang on, let me unplug this. He is in a company vehicle, so I can see if Brian is stopping by any Hooters or if he's stopping by Wesley's Booby Trap. This is fantastic. So Brian, according to this, is 47 miles away, so he's not going to make the show tonight. He did a talk tonight. Of all things on drought, Aubrey, we see you. This is looking good. Wow.
My earbuds died on me, so I have these, but they're not working in the speaker. But that's okay. We've
cleared the big hurdle. We can see and hear you. That's the big battle. So awesome. So anyway, I sent a note to the producer to do the show notes tonight, and he's set to do that. Now, yeah, Brian is 47 miles out, so I think he's out for sure. But I think everybody, this is going to be a good show. I'm excited about this show.
All right, so Mike's working, camera's working, and I can hear you. We have success.
Yes.
That's really good.
I wanted to hop on early. That way I could, if there was a problem, I could fix it before show.
No, you are in. Looking good, sounding good, clean as a whistle.
I wish I had a chance to grab my shirt tonight. I didn't get a chance to go home for dinner, but the shirt is super comfy.
Yeah, this is really comfortable. I love this thing. I wear it all the time. In fact, I was in a let's see, where was I wearing this thing? And a guy came up to me, "Hey, man, I listen to the show all the time." Goodness. I mean, he chased me down. He was so excited when he saw this shirt.
The gym. Maybe it was the gym.
No. Yeah. No, I was in a supermarket. I was in a Publix.
I love Publix.
Yeah, and this guy just, hey, saw that and realized who it was. Just loved the show, so I thought that was kind of cool. But no, we for those while we're talking on the pre-show here, until Thursday of this week, that's December 15th. You can still get these second gen items, and they feel good. I love this thing. I wear this thing all the time. So, and another little oddity tonight. This is the what we call the Toys for Tots 26-hour marathon, which we do every year. I've been doing this, I think, for 15 years. But the only oddity about this one Monday night of the whole year, I have a 10 o'clock live shot. So one of our other esteemed hosts will have to close out the show. I'll have to leave. Thank goodness it's close. It's only about 10 minutes away, but still I got to get down there and get, you know how these live shots are. You get strapped in and be sure everything's working. And obviously we're short-staffed. I had Brian out doing a talk, and he's out of town, and Megan, I think, is out of town. So there's like nobody backing me up, which is really creepy. Almost every time we do a live shot, there's somebody back here at the station. So if the microwave goes down or the live view, whatever we're using, then you just pick it up with the guy in the station here. Bill, you okay?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, why? Why do you
have to describe that sound?
It's not me. That's not me. No sound over here.
It's coming down your channel. It's like, so it sounds like you're crunching papers, or how would you best describe it, Aubrey?
Quiet as a mouse.
I didn't hear it. I missed it.
I think
maybe it's me.
Another channel, because I could hear it too.
It could be me.
Aubrey.
Maybe it was me.
Wasn't me. I'm not the perpetrator this time.
Like maybe it was me. Who knows? Old men, we do make some strange bodily noises. So.
And then blame other people. Yeah, Bill, did you let that one?
Yeah, that's That's always my question for Dave, our news anchor, who's older than me. I said, Dave, if you're at the editorial meeting, you know the news department, they gather around these editorial meetings. Dave, if you're in an editorial meeting and old men just have this problem, let's say you just have to set yourself free. You just have to release yourself. And so how would you handle that? Would you, A, ignore it and try and act like nothing happened? B, apologize. Say, oh, I'm sorry. C, would you blame it on somebody else in the editorial meeting? How would you handle that? And he's the kind of guy that would blame it on somebody else. So, all right. But anyway, I'll have to leave about probably 9:40 Central Time. And I hate that because I love having Gary on the show. And the cool thing about Gary, he doesn't work for the Weather Service anymore.
Yeah. Oh, you just get ready. You just get ready. Tonight he's going to be a controversial one.
Yeah, we're going to have controversy on this show. But he just sent out a tweet. I may even behave myself. And the next line said, well, no, probably not. So
no, there will be no behaving.
That's
tonight.
good.
Yeah. No, and see, this is what we need to have an open dialogue here. I can't wait to get him on the show because I got all kind of.
I do have a question. Since I happen to miss parts of the show and I haven't gone back and listened to all of them yet, did we talk about the Gatlinburg fire and the alerts that may have not gone out?
I don't think so, Bill.
Not about that part of it, no.
Because you're right. I mean, I don't think there was good distribution of information via all these digital channels, including the push phone messages.
Well, it sounds like one agency thought it was covered and the other agency thought it went out, and there was just kind of a disconnect, not placing blame on, such a horrible situation. But if there's a problem, I think, it maybe needs to be figured out before something else happens.
You're our investigative reporter, Aubrey. It's your job to sniff out the facts.
Let's see if I can call someone.
Do you notice Gary and Kevin came on at the same time? The two accelerants. This is great. Gary, don't hold back. We're counting on this being a big show with big download numbers.
All right.
Yeah, the numbers are down, Gary. We need your help.
All right, I'll take my best shot.
Prop up our sagging ratings. Our ratings are doing pretty good.
Just kidding.
So, Kevin's in his old age has just become mellow, and it's almost like he's on medication or something. I don't know what happened to him. He was our fireball, and now he's just mellow. He just loves everything and everybody. Kevin, what's the matter with you? Hello?
He's muted. There's something going on the set.
He did
He's
this.
not going to take it all.
Tapped on his mic and he held up one finger. And
no, I had the wrong mic punched up in the settings there. Hello.
Oh, okay.
Kevin.
No, I got old and gave up. It was too tiring.
Oh.
It was. It was just. It's too wearying. Maybe Gary can speak to this too. It's too wearying to repeatedly be way out in front and get nowhere, and then have a bunch of idiots come up years later to do what you were trying to do years earlier. It literally just happened to me. I mean, somebody sent me a thing about it's a station that's on the Roku box, and I had a developer ready to go. I modeled a weather app for Roku a minimum of 4 years ago. And everybody that I brought it to went, huh, what? I don't get it. And
You're ahead of your time, Kevin.
Well, it's just worn me out. I just can't take it anymore.
Wow.
I'm tired.
Don't be talking like that, Kevin. They'll take you out and shoot you behind the barn.
And that almost would be better.
So we are waiting on our television friends to join us. And the minute that happens, we can actually roll the show and get this thing started on time. We'll talk about the schedule during the actual show here. But we are going to do a show next Monday night, and then a show next. Let me look at my right calendar here. Next Wednesday night with Greg Carbon, the year ender. So that'll be kind of exciting stuff. And again, it's 29 after the hour. Had to go in there and change the radar on this digital weather channel because the local radar in our market is down for the life extension, the WSR 88D service life extension program.
They're changing the oil.
That sounds painful.
I would like to sign up for one of those programs.
Yeah, I thought you were doing that at the gym. That's what you're doing.
Yeah, I'm trying to. So we are now on television. That's cool. We hit right at the bottom of the hour. They came out of the ID, and here we are. So we're going to start this show on time. So what I will do right now is hit a couple of record buttons for track number 1 and track number 2. And here we go in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. This is WeatherBrains episode number 569 for December 12th, 2016. Less than 2 weeks away from Christmas Day. This is James Spann. Thanks for taking the time to join us this week. I note Kevin Selle is on the air. Kevin, what's on your mind? Say it.
I'm very excited that we have a reactivation of our WeatherBrains second-gen T-shirts and hoodie, which you are proudly modeling. I apologize for the confusion on the number of days that this thing is available, but I got a note today that it says it's tipped again. And so if you're listening this week, you have until sometime during the day on Thursday to go ahead and you can order. Now, we could get another run if enough people say, I want one after it goes away, but this is the second generation. It's a different logo. If you're watching the show, James has been modeling. Speaking of which, now, we've had two. We need Aubrey's help on this because we've had 2 pictures of James wearing the hoodie, and he says it's wonderful and it's soft and it's good quality and all these things. But the first one, he looked like an orangutan.
Wait, that was 2 different pictures? It wasn't the same?
The original one was a screen grab from the show, I think 2 weeks ago. And he had his hands up on his shoulders, and I don't know what he was doing with his face. And then earlier today, he tweeted out a picture, and he's got this scowling grimace, which prompted me to retweet his tweet, saying that the James Spann face is not reflective of the actual quality of the T-shirt and hoodie, that you should maybe go and purchase them. But
well, maybe I'll recreate the James Spann face.
Oh no, okay, yeah, that'll be good. Would you, with a caption, would you buy a hoodie from this man?
There it is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
For those that are watching, that's the shot that Kevin is talking about, and I just
it's
don't
so festive with the tree.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it makes no sense. I've got that goofball look in my face. There's a tree back there in the background. But
I thought that was deep thinking going on. I thought that was deep thinking.
Exactly. I'm trying to think of a way to communicate how excellent this hoodie is and this merchandise. So,
and you're doing a great job at it too.
I don't have the words. I have a limited vocabulary set. So.
Well, listen, I'm thrilled to announce and to thank to everybody. You know, from the original shirts that we had, and these I think all accounts are better quality. But we've tipped over $1,000 that we've raised on this. And I saw Janice Bunting at the National Weather Festival in Norman a couple of weeks ago, and she said she just couldn't have been more excited to help us figure out a nice scholarship or something, maybe in JB's name, to give to some deserving folks with that $1,000 that we raised. So anybody who bought a shirt or a hoodie or whatever, thank you so much. We're just really appreciative of that.
But that's great. And again, this is to honor JB. For those that don't know, JB was on the show for many, many years. He was on the first episode. He's my mentor. You know, he's affected so many of us. He worked for the National Weather Service for many years, retired, came over to the dark side, worked media and consulting and stuff like that. And he was just so funny. We had so many great memories with JB, but this is for kind of to honor him and his life and his career. And it's kind of, and by the way, where else, I mean, for the weather weenie in your life, there's no better Christmas gift than a second-gen WeatherBrains hoodie or a T-shirt. So, and they're very good quality. Aubrey,
oh yeah.
You need to sell. I'm not a good salesman because of my goofy
No,
looks.
they are. They're super soft. They're softer than the first batch, and they are extremely, extremely comfortable. So I will put on my modeling hat tonight when I get home and model my lovely pink T-shirt because it comes in so many fantastic colors. it's going to brighten your day.
Yeah. We'll retweet Aubrey's and we'll sell a bunch of them, Kevin. We clearly don't mean none. So Aubrey, welcome back. Yeah, I feel so bad last week. You were there, but we couldn't hear you and we couldn't see you. It just wasn't working.
I was afraid maybe there was something wrong with my Snowball, and it's not that old, and it's a new computer, and I wasn't sure what the issue was, and been having some problems for a couple weeks. So tonight I tested everything, unplugged, replugged, tried another computer that didn't work, so got it working. Don't know what I did. It's working. It's great.
Whatever you did, it's happening. So we'll do some email here in just a little bit. But Bill, I'm excited about our guest. Let's bring him in here.
Yeah, James, our guest WeatherBrain tonight nearly made it to 36 years with the National Weather Service, 35 years, 9 months. He recently retired as the MIC at the Mount Holly office, serving the Philadelphia area, and he is a graduate of St. Louis University. It's great to have Gary Szatkowski joining us tonight. Gary, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Great to be here. Really happy to spend some time with you folks.
Well, we're excited too. So thank you for joining us, and it's good to have you here right before the holiday. So I can't start anywhere else but with Hurricane Sandy, because that's how I sort of got to know you, Gary. So talk for a minute about Hurricane Sandy and your role in it and your biggest takeaways from that storm.
Well, sure. Yeah, that was obviously that was a huge impact for the region here, the area that the Mount Holly office serves, where I worked, for almost 20 years, and that really affected not just all the people, with the weather, in terms of the weather impacts, and it certainly impacted me and everyone else at the weather office. And it was just a little over 4 years ago now, so next year will be the 5-year anniversary, and you still see people struggling, with the rebuilding process. There's still some people angry at FEMA and flood insurance and stuff like that, and it's all repercussions after Sandy. But my recollections are just one. I couldn't have been prouder of the office, the Mount Holly office. We were talking as that event was approaching, and one of the analogies that I told the staff when we were kind of gathered up, probably for about the last time before the storm actually arrived, is just do what you've been doing and just keep doing it, and err on the side of doing more. I said, however this plays out at the end, using sort of a football analogy, just leave it all out on the field. Whether we win, lose, whatever, do not look back and say, gee, I wish I would have done such and such, where that would have been more. So, and the staff lived up to that promise. I mean, they've done that certainly on other occasions, but this was such a high impact event, such an exhausting event, physically and emotionally, that was, one of my big takeaways. Very, very hardworking, talented staff. It really kind of launched me into thinking more about, social science, and I had started doing some stuff on Twitter, and did more with Twitter after that. That really kind of leapt, leaps and bounds after Sandy. But it was a real learning experience for me. It's kind of like this old dog, learned a couple more new tricks there before the end of his weather service career by looking at what happened during Sandy. One of my big takeaways was that was really kind of an excellent forecast. If you look at the track, the intensity, the timing, the storm surge, which was the biggest impact in terms of the magnitude. And you saw so many people just get screwed up, on stuff. And it suddenly dawned on me that, I'd seen a lot of changes during the course of my career. That we were talking earlier about the service life extension program for the 88D. I was around so long that I actually saw it deployed. I was actually at Norman, Oklahoma when the first one came out. So here it is. All the way at the other end. And so what I saw was that the weather had actually. We've gotten so good at it that now people are actually, not fully leveraging all the information that's out there. That, for me, was one of the big takeaways from Sandy, and what I've been talking about really now for a number of years.
Gary, I want to jump in. This is Kevin, if I can, because I have to go do a Fox show at 9:00. But you had mentioned social, and I would love to hear your comments about the current state of social, because this was obviously some years ago that you just mentioned, and your thoughts going forward.
Yeah, well, social's, kind of certainly in some respects, it's kind of a hot mess right now, so I think people are still wrestling with the idea of how you handle, the trolls. I've broken some of the rules, they kind of say keep it high or whatever. I've actually engaged in trolls and in a couple of cases wore them down. And I did that in part because I wanted to try to learn how to speak troll. It was sort of like to know your enemy kind of philosophy. I'm sort of like, I really, I could mute them or block them on Twitter. And with Twitter, you have that available to you.
That's interesting.
So I've tried to learn why, some people are just in there maliciously, but there's others who, are in there, trying to gum up the works, I think, a little more programmatically. And so it is interesting to say, okay, how can I like actually burst this person's, bubble, so to speak, and try to get the message out. But it's easy, there's a lot of not so good behaviors out there. But part of it too, I think, is the, social media's problem is the social part. The people, it's not the meteorologist part as solely. It's also the people part. We get a forecast really right, and we tell people, again, going back to Sandy, or I would argue even during Matthew, hey, you should evacuate or whatever. Some people do, some people don't. It's easy to get outraged. The media finds somebody who's, for Matthew, there was before it was approaching the Florida coast, there was some couple who were vacationing down there, and they're right there. Someone was interviewing right there down there on the beach in Florida, and with Matthew approaching, and they're like, oh, we're from Wisconsin, and we're down here vacationing. We've been through blizzards before, and so we're not going to evacuate. We're going to stay and watch it. And that turned out to be an okay decision given the final track of the storm. But just social media exploded. People were sort of on the weather end of things. We're calling them all sorts of names for putting themselves at risk. And fundamentally, that is correct. They put themselves at risk. But I think the broader thing with social media, Twitter, Facebook, other things is how can we actually talk to people in such a way that they would make a better decision in that circumstance, or if we're just going to accept that some people are going to kind of stay in harm's way, what's plan B? What's the role of social media in trying to work through those situations? But I think it's a great way to communicate a lot of information to people. I think we have a president-elect who's, demonstrated that, you can use Twitter for some very interesting things and short circuit a lot of perceived notions and sort of normalized behaviors. We've seen some of that in weather, but I think we could see a lot more of it in weather to benefit us in the sense that we could get some stuff across to people. One, that they make some better decisions, but also two, that maybe if they do get in harm's way, that they then start making some good decisions. I've seen people put themselves in harm's way and then recover. So I think with social media, the question is, can we accelerate that kind of recovery process if they've made an initial bad call?
You said, though, it's a hot mess, and I can't see a path to making it a cooler unmess.
Yeah. Well, and I don't know what, I'm still with it. I'm still on Twitter. I'm still trying, I'm looking at it differently now that I've retired from the Weather Service, but everyone goes through their teenage years, and some more catastrophically and some less catastrophically, but it tends to be kind of an emotional and at times hair-raising experience. And then people do move on to something a little bit better. So I do think that, we're still growing. I think Twitter continues to change. I think social media continues to change. I don't think we're done changing. I don't think we're done growing. I don't know. Things can always go downhill. Things can circle the drain and go away. But I like to think that there's still some possibilities there to make it better than it is.
So let me jump in too, Brill. I'm sorry, but while we're on social media, I would say, Gary, when you were the MIC at Mount Holly, you were the most active MIC in the country on social media with a personal account. Did you ever get any, criticism or issues with the Weather Service big shots over tweets or material you'd put out on social media? Because I think your feed is fantastic. It is, you engage with people. It's interesting. You are honest. You lay it out. I think it's marvelous. But did you get any kind of, problems from those above you?
Well, certainly on multiple occasions, I made my bosses nervous, and that was, I'm not the most sensitive guy on the planet, but even I could pick up that they were getting, kind of nervous. But they really did. They, in all candor, they lost it when I did that apology back about a year, well, now almost 2 years ago. It'll be coming up, it was back in January 2015. That crossed the boundary for them. So, and that crossed the boundary for me too, for that matter. So, but anyway, it was a way to explore some options with social media and see what we could do. But that wasn't something they were very uncomfortable with that.
Well, and let's just, I'm sorry, Bill Murray's going to shoot me because
this is what we're here for.
I have to go do a live shot in a little bit. I just want, and while we're talking about the apology, and again, I guess this is what made you famous. And I'm just picking one source. This is CBS News, and this is January 27th, 2015. And they picked up on your tweet. Yes. And the tweet says, you made a lot of tough decisions expecting us to get it right, and we didn't. Once again, I'm sorry. Why in the world would that make anybody within the Weather Service unhappy? Because I thought that was heartfelt. It was sincere. You've been there a long time. Why would anybody not like that?
Well, I think, it's hard for me to be completely dispassionate. It got kind of emotional. And I was actually, banned from talking to the media for just a little over a week. And when I say banned, I mean, it wasn't like I couldn't talk about, I've kind of labeled it the apology storm, and now I talk about it. But if you'd called the office for about 7 or 8 days after that storm, and you were a member of the media, and you just wanted to know the temperature, the bank on the corner could give you the time and temperature. I couldn't, and that was just
wait a minute. What guy? Who? I mean, and I don't want to get you in trouble, but you're retired. I mean. What's up with that? Their head would explode if I worked for the Weather Service.
So, well, yeah, I mean, I think their head almost exploded a couple times. I think I caused some head swelling. Let's put it that way. I'm not sure if it exploded completely.
Were they angry about the apology?
Yeah, and now to answer the question more, on point. They were concerned about how it took the Weather Service off message. They wanted to talk about the successes. Typically you want to talk about the success. You don't want to focus on the failure or the mistakes. They were afraid it would set a precedent for possibly or needing people to apologize in the future. I just think that, I mean, it's not hard to find. You can go all the way to the top of the Weather Service, and you can find statements and quotes about how we shouldn't apologize. So I mean, it's just a mindset. It's really kind of like the way things were. I mean, if I wanted to be really snarky, I'd kind of say the 1990s are calling it like their strategy back. I mean, I just think it's the way we used to do things, and I tried something new. And in the past, there were other things. I did I did the personal plea during Sandy, which was, sort of breaking the mold. And that played well, and that was okay because it was a success. And I got some notoriety for that. But the apology made a lot of people uncomfortable. And they didn't like those stories that, that some of you were, the couple that you were showing. There were quite a few. I will say that I got a lot of positive feedback from it. The thought process, such as it was that it was a really bad forecast for the Philadelphia area and for much of New Jersey until you got way up into the northeast part of the state. And when I say bad, we had 18 inches, up to 18 inches of snow forecast for the city of Philadelphia for that event. And the official number when it finally came in was 1.2 inches. So we're off by a factor of 15. So, when I've tried to explain this to other people, it's like you had a hurricane warning up for 75-mile-an-hour winds and you had 6-mile-an-hour winds. People are going to be a little irritable, And so my point from, my previous work with social science in following from Sandy was, the people can appreciate in certain circumstances where you kind of step out and you're just honest regarding what happened, whether it's the threat during Sandy and the way I kind of stepped out and talked about that, or in the sense that a forecast went really, really bad. And what I really wanted to do was I wanted to diffuse the anger that would rightfully have been felt by our customers, our key partners, the general public, about a forecast that missed the mark by that much, in part so that they can then pivot, move past the anger and get to a better place where you're willing to start being comfortable with the Weather Service forecast again, because you don't know there could be another big storm coming in 5 or 7 days. And you don't want people still processing anger at that point in time. So it really was successful in diffusing the anger in the Philadelphia area. I mean, in New Jersey, there really wasn't much. I actually got some positive kudos from the mayor of Philadelphia at that time, Mayor Michael Nutter. Governor Christie in New Jersey didn't say anything, and for me that was a major victory. Just that the fact that he would kind of be cool and not be critical of the forecast, because it could have gone very well where it could have been gone where he would have been critical of the forecast, and that would have caused some damage that then would have to be repaired. So the forecast caused some damage anyway, but I think the healing process, the repairing process, the normal human reaction quickly transitioned from anger to sort of moving on and accepting what happened. So that was some of the logic behind it. That it's more of an emotional kind of perspective than sort of a nuts and bolts forecast kind of perspective.
Well, we had the same thing down here, and I did the same thing. This was in 2014, and I wrote a long apology. This was not a tweet. This was a fairly long blog post. Of course, all the media, the print media picked up on it. And I got all these people that work in the weather enterprise. Ooh, you shouldn't apologize. Ooh, and their underwear was about to start flapping up down their legs. So my position is, what are we supposed to tell you? Do you mean that we're supposed to represent ourselves as inerrant? We can't make any mistakes? Are we narcissistic? We're going to make mistakes. We're going to make big mistakes. We're in the business of predicting the future in a very complex and chaotic liquid environment. And we can't, sometimes we foul up, and sometimes we foul it up big. And I fouled it up in a huge way 2.5 years ago here. And I'll say this, some of the one thing I encourage the younger people to say or to see is that not everything it's a troll. When you start getting feedback. In fact, let me share one of the emails I got after this thing. This is one of many, but and this was hard. This is a hard read for me. And I'll just quote one of the emails. It says, "Looks like you got it wrong yesterday with your prediction of a light dusting and no accumulation. How can you guys be so badly off as hundreds still sit in their schools and hundreds remain in their cars on highways, and no telling how many have had to leave their cars stranded and knock on strangers' doors for shelter, while others have paid the ultimate price." We had 5 deaths. How can you be so wrong? Has everything with your career over the past few years gone to your head? You are still expected to be vigilant and not complacent. What a shame as I think of the people still out there and the ones who are dead. That is not a troll. That is not a hater. That is not a know-it-all. That is valid criticism. And I keep criticism like that in a little file, and I try and look at one a day. And again, I apologize for this, and I thought it was the right thing to do. People know that you're sincere. I think they know that you feel horrible about what happened, and you're going to take every bit of action to evaluate what happened, what went wrong, and fix it so it doesn't happen again. Gary, I don't see why anybody in the weather enterprise, including some high up jabroni guys at the government, would be mad at you for apologizing. I thought it was heartfelt and sincere, and it diffused everything. I don't understand why anybody would be mad at you. That's insane.
Well, one of the things, I did a presentation at the NWA conference in Norfolk several months back, and I talked about it. Title of the presentation was an apology, a couple tweets, and some personal experience, and it's basically, again, my sort of if I was giving the Weather Service a hard time here, I would simply say, one of the things, because you guys know to varying degrees, there's talk about, change, work, operational workforce analysis and stuff like that. But one of the terms I use to describe their partners is, deep relationships. And, one of my public comments at the NWA is that if you're in a deep relationship and you don't think you're ever going to apologize, either one, you're not really in a deep relationship and you're in for kind of a rude awakening, or two, you're a guy. It's just that people need to, I think, break some of the parallels. I think, the Weather Service and other parts of the weather enterprise are still very scientific oriented, technical oriented, guy oriented, and a lot of behaviors have been well established, over decades. And so, though we talk about change, I still find, particularly sort of in the social science area, some of the stuff is kind of lagging, still kind of lagging indicators. So I think part of the, sometimes the Weather Service talks about, things, when they talk about deep relationships with, some of their partners, that clicks with me. That makes sense. I understand what they're talking about there. But then, to have some of the same people then kind of, like get very uncomfortable with an apology. I'm like, well, obviously their definition or their expectation of a deep relationship is not the same as mine. And I did like what you showed, there regarding, the person who was very unhappy, but legitimately so. And to me, the other raging message, and again, a lot of people get this, and, I've talked about this, is just how much the weather business has changed, over the last, 3.5 decades that, I've been involved with it, that you have so much more trust, so much more resource commitment, so much more personal commitment on all up and down the spectrum, whether it's a governor or a mayor, or, if you're talking about the person who's deciding what to do because their kid's going, or they're wondering if their kid's going to go to school today or not, or, have to go do an early dismissal because of the weather. All those people trust the weather forecast now more than they ever have, and certainly way more than they did at the beginning, of my career. And that's a tremendous compliment to everyone that's involved with weather forecasting, is that we've gotten so good that people now trust us to get it right. And some of that commentary, in that email you showed, was in part based on that. I would argue some of that wouldn't have occurred 30 years ago, because they would have been kind of shocked if we got the forecast right, if there was a storm, even a minor one, and, we caught it in terms of its impacts. But now there's an expectation we're going to catch them. The DOT is all prepared, they're prepping the highways days in advance up here, and the trucks will be sitting on the side of the road before the first flake of snow is falling. The airlines are flying all their planes out of the airports that are going to be impacted. Up here, there's huge public transit, and rail is shut down, commuter rail is shut down. The subways in New York City have been shut down on a couple of occasions. That's all very expensive stuff. That all comes with a price in terms of people, inconvenience to society. That the people who depend on those things, and it's all keying off the forecast. It didn't happen, and almost none of that happened 30 years ago. School closures, I can remember from 30 years ago, keying on the forecast. But all this other stuff, shutting down all these things or rearranging things or getting prepared, were simply unheard of 30 years ago. And so now, the game we play, there's a lot more chips in the middle of the table there. People have a lot more skin in the game, depending on our forecast. And so when things blow up, when things really miss the mark by a wide margin, I told my boss, either going to apologize or you're going to do something else, but you can't keep doing what you've been doing without having some very angry customers. Now,
Gary,
they didn't buy that, but that's my point.
Is this, I'm sorry to interrupt you because I got to do my show here, but you made some fascinating comments, and it makes me feel like this resistance to change and this decades-old mentality is actually setting up the Weather Service, and I include broadcasters in this as well. The refusal to change and to evolve is exactly what IBM and the Weather Channel and AccuWeather are asking for, to relegate the Weather Service to this sort of maintenance function of launching balloons and doing a few other things while they take over the operations and the forecasts. And it seems like they're enabling that. And I'll have to hang up and listen. I'll come back later.
Okay. Well, I think we need better messaging and more effective messaging. And I think, there's, I talked about all the changes I've seen in terms of how we're, producing products and services that people trust. But all the internal mechanisms have changed too, to great degrees. I see it, to the very limited extent I understand it in TV, and broadcast meteorology. But certainly on the weather, side of things, I mean, all this digital processing of data and the way you can access it now on the internet, we've really radically changed the way we do things. And there's no sign that to me that the pace of change is slowing down. Certainly not stopping, but I don't even think it's slowing down. One of the things from the Sandy supplemental money that Congress, deployed after Hurricane Sandy, a lot of that went to computing, resources, computer horsepower that the NSEP, the portion of the Weather Service that does the computing, all that hardware's, coming online or has come online. The software to leverage it is coming online, and there's going to be big changes in terms of the way, we look at stuff and how we can use it. I think numerical weather processing will become even more accurate, and we'll be able to go farther out in time, and be trusted with it. For the Weather Service, I'm sure it won't be too long before they go from the 7-day forecast to the 10-day forecast. Other folks are already doing 10-day forecasts. There's metrics to show their skill now going out to 10 days. So how do we message that? Do you want to, that's the things we have to work on. Do you want to show a snowfall map on day 8? Probably, right now a lot of people say, oh no, don't do that. But if you've got a forecast and there's some big numbers showing up in some of the guidance out on day 8, I think we still have to figure out still how we want to message that. I think whoever does it best gets to continue to have a lot of skin in the game, continues to play. So if the Weather Service gets very, very good at that, and I think the Weather Service is very good with, working closely with emergency management and other governmental partners. And they trust the Weather Service, at least from my experience here at Mount Holly. There's a lot of trust placed on the forecast. So I think, as long as we continue to leverage and change that will, I think, bode well for whichever organizations, do that. I do think some other things have to change. I'll upset some folks, probably in the forecast ranks with the Weather Service and say, I think the day is coming where we don't need 2 forecasters on a midnight shift trying to improve on, day 6 dew points. That is right now kind of what the model still is. The model right now for the Weather Service with these 120 plus field offices was really based on the structure of what happened with the WSR-8AD, the Doppler radar deployment. The concept was back from the mid-'80s. The actual implementation of it was in the late '80s and early '90s. And so there's been some evolution. A lot of the weather offices now are much more, involved with working with their partners, in ways that they weren't doing even 10 years ago. But in terms of staffing, in terms of, how you do this, there's still a lot of stuff to be figured out. And, there's some hard questions, I think, for the Weather Service still, to address. And they're obviously they're working on it. But the other thing I'll say too, there's I referenced this earlier, there's a new administration coming in, a whole bunch of new players, a whole bunch of new political appointees will be showing up. I'm going to speculate that the incoming Secretary of Commerce is going to be pretty surprised when he finds out he's got the National Weather Service in his portfolio. He's got NOAA in his portfolio. And they'll have, and then they'll be like, okay, so tell me more. What about this? What about this Weather Service? What about this NOAA? Tell me what this is and what you guys do and why you need the amount of money you do. And, it's important, and they know this, but it's important to have some really good answers at that point in time because, you only get one chance to make a first impression. So I think one of the hard questions, that will be asked is, about, the structure of things, why we do what we do. What about this? Could we do things differently? And you gotta have some good answers for that. So I think the Weather Service is trying, but I can't. I left in May, so I'm not even going to speculate on how well prepared they are to answer questions from political appointees associated with the incoming administration, which they'll have to deal with here in another 2 or 3 months. It sometimes takes a little while to fill in some of the folks after the new president takes office. So it won't necessarily happen on January 20th, but not long after they'll be doing some briefing and stuff. Now I will say also just on the political side of things, I think the Weather Service has done a pretty good job about having a good relationship on Capitol Hill on both, with both parties. So I do think they do have some good allies from a political standpoint there. But, Weather Service, like every other agency, resides in the executive branch. And so the executive, the chief executive and the Office of Management and Budget and the political appointees will have a lot to say, in the coming months regarding what happens for the National Weather Service portion of the weather enterprise. Obviously, some of those decisions may impact other areas too outside the Weather Service. We'll just have to see what happens.
So Gary, talk about the bill that died on the House floor today. Talk about its significance. Explain what it meant and what's going to happen because it didn't pass.
Yeah. Frankly, I'm not quite sure. To me, that didn't come with any more money. They were basically kind of trying to redirect the focus of efforts within the Weather Service and some of the research aspects to things. I think some of those things are kind of within the span of control. I mean, you don't want to misspend money, so you always got to go. Which means if Congress gives you $10 to spend on a certain thing, you spend it on that. You don't spend it on something else. But there certainly could be discussion. Again, up on Capitol Hill with the new administration and the new Congress that takes. Is this what you want us to do? Appropriate us the money the way you want us to spend it. And, some people won't be happy about that. That's for certain. But, elections have consequences. And one of them is that, the people who come into town, having won the election, they get to say some things and do some things. And so in the short term that bill not making it probably kind of freezes things sort of in place. But longer term, if something similar like that was to come back, we'd still have to see if if it means some additional money, then, people will kind of breathe a little easier, and, everything's always easier when you have a little more money to work with. I don't think there'll be, additional money showing up. So, I think then it gets a little more challenging. You have to kind of manage what you got, the existing, resources, your existing budget, with some new priorities. So, we'll see what happens. I'm a big fan of, better weather forecasting. But I'm a bigger fan of making sure people understand how to leverage and benefit from the better weather forecasting. Climate research is important too, and I don't want to denigrate that in any way. But my interest has always been more on the weather side of the house, and for me, the gap remains between what we know, how we communicate it, and what people actually do with it. We've gotten so good with weather forecasting. And we're getting better with the communication, but I think we can improve on that. That's now, to me, the gap that's opening up is, okay, I gave you some really good information, and then the general public or key decision makers didn't really make the right decisions with it. Why is that? And other groups, other professions deal with this. I've heard, doctors talk about the difficulty of getting patients to just take the prescriptions. Take it when you're supposed to take it and finish the prescription. Don't stop. If it's a 10-day prescription, don't stop at day 5 because you're feeling better. And so other organizations, other disciplines have this problem of being, they think, crystal clear in terms of what they want you to do, and then people go and do something else. And so the question is, if it's really kind of like no harm, no foul, maybe you don't worry about it too much. But if it's really leading to some negative outcomes, and it's not bad, based on a bad forecast that the Weather Service made or the Weather Enterprise made, but it's based on somebody misinterpreting what was said, then we got a different problem. We got a different problem to deal with. When I first started, I think the lead time for tornado warnings in the Weather Service was 2 minutes. So your goal, when it's 2 minutes, your goal is pretty straightforward: double it. And then when you do that, double it again, and then when you do that, double it again. But there does come a time, I think we've seen this, where you're going from, if you keep doubling it, going from 16 minutes to 32 minutes to 64 minutes, and there were some long lead times specified in that bill that died regarding tornado warnings. You see people start to do some things that I don't think we at all anticipated. If you have a tornado warning with a 1 hour lead time, you can gridlock an entire metropolitan area if you do that just right. And, sort of like people don't do what you really intended. them to do, but you hit them, at the right time, and it's a point where the population can be especially mobile. All of a sudden, you didn't intend for a traffic jam to occur during a tornado moving through a metropolitan area, but you can get that now with these kinds of things. I've seen, school closure announcements now based on like day 2 severe weather outlooks. There'll be like a moderate risk or something like that, or a high, and people are like not even having school, the next day, or they make the decision first thing in the morning before the school buses roll, saying, hey, we're not going to have school today because the, severe weather outlook is bad. And I'm not sure, on the Weather Service side, we've ever really advocated that, or if we did, it's been pretty localized. That's a behavior. From what we're saying, it's based on both our skill and our communication, but it wasn't. I would argue it's not an anticipated outcome. It could still be okay that they're doing that, but whenever you start seeing people do things, there's the obvious stuff like there's a hurricane warning out. Why don't you evacuate? There's that kind of stuff. But there's this other stuff where people do take action based on information we provide when we wouldn't, in a way or in a timeline that we wouldn't necessarily anticipated. And I think those behaviors are worthy of a lot of study and understanding, because I think it'll help us out in a lot of other areas too once we get a better feel for that.
So Gary, do you have any feel for who might be proposed or nominated as the Department of Commerce Secretary, and what effect would that have? And is there any truth to the rumor that it's Joel Myers?
Yeah. I have not heard it. I mean, there have been some names floated. I haven't paid much attention other than the fact that I think it's like they're more from a business background. I don't even know if the selection's been made formally or not. But that's pretty traditional for the Department of Commerce. The Commerce Secretary is almost always from a business background. So there's always, I think, some surprise when they inherit NOAA, and they inherit the Weather Service. So, but now, there's still plenty of time here, to kind of see how this all unfolds.
So kind of grade the National Weather Service management over the OWA. You're out of it for 6 or 7 months now, but talk about what your assessment is of how they've handled that.
Well, it's been described as kind of an open process, and there are a lot of people involved in things like that. But it is, I think, for the very early comments, you could see where things were going. So in other words, theoretically, an operational workforce assessment could say, well, Weather Service, you do a great job, but you're under-resourced. You actually need like 20% more staff out in operations, out in the field. And that was pretty clear that wasn't going to happen. I mean, from day one, you could tell from the tone and just the way, some of the wording, there was not like a bold bullet point in any PowerPoint I saw, but you could tell that we were really kind of, it was more about seeing how we should best reallocate the resources we're given, which has been, there's been a number of studies, the NAPA study, public administration folks, they recommended, something basically along the lines of what the Weather Service is doing. I think political stuff immediately constrained it, away from anything like, getting 20% more staff. The flip side is, if you propose closing or shrinking sufficient number of offices, you'll get people to blow up on the other side. So I think they're finding their way, through the process, and the focus, I think it is a good idea. The focus is on what's called IDSS, or decision support services. That we're basically looking at trying to, work with our partners, again, because it addresses this issue of trying to make sure our partners are fully leveraging the weather information that's out there. There's a lot of it, and a lot of times it's quite good, and they really need more help in determining the level of trust to put in a forecast and making sure they understand all the particulars. So I don't know. I guess I'll give them sort of a B-. I think one, I think they why not a higher grade? Actually, should have moved faster. And actually, I think events may be overwhelmed by the change of administration. It was never clear to me why this timeline necessarily needed to take as long as it did. I'm sure they could give you 900 reasons, why it is. And one of the reasons would be to kind of segue into something else. One of the reasons they'd say is, well, we're short staffed, we don't have enough people to do it. And the Weather Service is, impacted by, a very serious number of vacancies A lot of them out in the operations area, out in the field, but some also at the Weather Service headquarters and regional headquarters, which are the folks who would have to work on some of the planning associated with the workforce analysis. So all of that, why we have so many openings in the Weather Service, at this point in time, why there's so many, why it continues to get worse. The people in charge of the Weather Service can answer those questions. But I would simply say those are, I think, a handicap for trying to move forward with whatever the Weather Service is going to become in the future.
Well, it seemed interesting to me that the union went to the Hill. So, and I'm sure that management is on the Hill, but I saw a Hair on Fire article about the union going to the Hill, about the hiring freeze. So talk about that for a second. Do you consider the Weather Service to be public safety? Would it be exempted from that anyway? Or is there a real threat there? Or is this sort of where management wants it to go?
I can't, it's odd to me, how long and persistent the problem has been with all the vacancies in the Weather Service. And it's, they've talked about workforce management, the folks who hire and promote, to do the paperwork. You do all the paperwork, post a vacancy announcement, review all the applicants, and the personnel people, and then they turn it back to, the selecting official, which, for me, when I was at the Mount Holly office, a lot of times that was me. I was filling a forecaster position or an intern position, but I had to wait on workforce management. They're the ones who posted the vacancy, and I had a window, and when it was open, and you sent in your application to them, and they processed it. So it's just very odd that this has been going on now for about 4 years, where the Weather Service is pretty significantly understaffed, and it's kind of a workforce management problem. We should good leaders should have figured this out and solved it in under 4 years. So that's part of it. That at least breeds to a lot of, suspicion, that this might have been, the plan all along, again, to get snarky for a little bit, I said, the Weather Service has kind of turned into the reverse of Hotel California. You can leave anytime you want, but you can't, it's much harder to get in or get promoted. I recently retired, and everything was basically smooth as silk. That there's I have no complaints with how the whole process unfolded. It does take a number of months to kind of get everything finalized after you retire in terms of your retirement pay and benefits and stuff like that. But everything went along the timeline I was supposed to. Conversely, I told my bosses, back in, I think it was March of 2015, that, hey, I'm probably leaving, in spring of 2016. And I left near the end of May of 2016. I kind of reaffirmed that along the way. And as far as I know, the vacancy announcement still isn't out. If it's I checked a week or two ago and it still wasn't out. So if it's come out in the last day or two, I'm incorrect. But as opposed to saying 3 or 4 or 5 months to get my retirement processed. This is, there's this, incredibly long time, I gave them plenty of heads up, and still, you're looking at 6 to 7 months now with the MIC position being vacant. And, if the vacancy goes out, it's still going to take a couple of months, to select, and then you give the person some time to report to the duty station. So that's a long time, particularly since, given all the other constraints. You certainly have circumstances where people have to leave rather suddenly for whatever reason from their career, and that you can't do a lot of advanced planning for that. But that wasn't from my personal experience. So that part just seems odd that you can retire and it's all timely and everything from the Federal Service, but the Weather Service still can't get people hired and promoted in a timely manner. So given that there's an operational workforce analysis, and people wonder if there might be fewer people working for the Weather Service, when this finally comes out, and that's idle chatter and speculation. I haven't seen anything, official about that. But just the fact that there's all these vacancies, some people wonder if they're just kind of greasing the skids.
Yeah.
One of the phrases I've heard. Let's put it that way.
So the most important question was: did the check come on time for your first retirement check, Gary?
Yeah, it did. I mean, that was kind of, everything was fine. There were no delays. They tell you, oh, you could be, up to 10 weeks without, seeing any federal, pension, and so that's, I mean, not like I'm living from paycheck to paycheck, but I'm used to getting pay every 2 weeks. So like 10 weeks, okay, you got to plan for that, but not even, pensions are monthly, and I got mine the first month after, it's paid in arrears. So, I got my June payment, on July 1st. So I was just like, oh, okay, everything's fine. Away we go. So, like I said, no issues as far as I was concerned. And I've talked with other, retirees, particularly some who retired within the last couple of years from the Mount Holly office, and their experience was the same. Everything went pretty smooth as they left. So,
hey, Gary, after this show, you might have a long wait for that next check. I'm just saying.
Who knows?
Yeah.
We'll have the WeatherBrains Benevolence Fund to help you out.
Yeah, we'll use the proceeds from these shirts here to your retirement.
I try not to keep it boring. I don't want to be boring.
Yeah. Exactly.
I can just imagine.
I've got to interrupt your interview real quick. I'm so sorry because I've got this odd situation. And for those that didn't hear the pre-show, we are in the middle of a Toys for Tots marathon. And this is an odd situation where I'm doing the weather live in the field at 11 o'clock Eastern, 10 o'clock Central. So I'm going to have to roll the recorded segments a smidgen early tonight. And actually, Brian Peters is in the field. So we've got Tony Rice in the Astronomy Report. And hopefully Aubrey will be around when we come back. And if not, Bill, you can bring her in. But let's pause real quick for Tony Rice and the Astronomy Report, and we will be right back.
Looking beyond the atmosphere, here's Tony Rice with your Astronomy Outlook.
You've probably heard of the passing of John Glenn. You probably also know that he was the first American to orbit Earth. You might not know that he was among the first to fly for the Navy, Marines, and Air Force, as well as NASA, when he served in World War II, Korea, and as he became a U.S. Navy test pilot in 1957. It was then that he set an LA to New York speed record, too. 2 years later, he was selected to be a member of the first group of NASA astronauts, the Mercury 7. He also flew aboard Space Shuttle Discovery in 1998, aboard STS-95, where he participated in investigations on the aging process. It's also where he set the record for the oldest person in space. John Glenn was the last surviving member of the Mercury 7. John is survived by Annie, his wife of 73 years, his son John and daughter Carolyn, as well as the numerous schools, a NASA Space Center, and the Columbus, Ohio airport that were named in his honor. Elsewhere, the moon reached perigee, or the closest point in its orbit to Earth, earlier this evening at 6:30 p.m. Eastern. So that means the final supermoon of 2016 and the third in a trio of supermoons arrives tomorrow, Tuesday, December 13th. The moon will reach its peak fullness at 7:05 p.m. Eastern, 6:05 p.m. Central, and so on. So you'll have the bright, beautiful moon to enjoy all night. It's actually kind of unwelcome this year. Tuesday night is also the peak of the Geminid meteor shower. Now, the Geminids are normally one of the best showers of the year, and I normally recommend you go out and take a look with upwards of 120 meteors per hour visible under good conditions. But this year's conditions are anything but good. That full moon, super or not, is going to make it difficult to see meteors. Only the brightest ones are going to shine through. Latest estimates have no more than about a dozen meteors per hour visible. Mark your calendars for the first week of January, though. The quantity should be much, much better. This meteor shower is expected to produce about 25 meteors per hour, but it often produces bright fireballs. That's your Astronomy Outlook. Follow me at RTP Hokie for more spacey stuff like this.
Outstanding. Always good to hear from Tony Rice. And so he gave us some good news and some bad news. We got a super moon, and it's going to knock out the Gemini, so maybe it'll just be cloudy, and I won't have to worry about it either way tomorrow night. So, Gary, thanks for sticking around with us. I know we're going to lose James here for a little bit, but we got Kevin. Kevin, anything you want to ask right now while we've got you for a few minutes? You may be muted, Kevin. Or your settings may have changed. Or you can try turning it off and turning it back on again. Or maybe it's me. Gary, can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Oh, good. And Aubrey's going to prepare to do some mail in a minute. So as soon as she checks in, I see her nodding over there. So anyway, so now after your forecast bust and your apology, Gary, and Governor Christie didn't weigh in on it, there weren't any problems on the Ben Franklin Bridge right after that, were there?
No, no,
Okay, good. All right, so nothing like that. That's good to know.
nothing.
That's very good. So, you know, we've talked about the OWA, and you mentioned some things, but you know, there's always this interesting situation when you look at the NDFD graphically. You know, you sort of see this patchwork or jigsaw puzzle of, you know, information, you know, that the different field offices have put into the system. So is that a real problem, or is that, you know, just window dressing for, you know, talking about issues?
I think it's a real problem. I think it's a growing problem in the sense that, going back to what I talked about earlier, you know, with the Sandy supplemental, you know, we've got more, you know, we've got greater computer horsepower, we've got more sophisticated computer models. Numerical guidance has gotten better and better. I think there's plenty of data, you know, plenty of verification to show that. And I think and it doesn't look jagged. You know, if you call up, pick whatever model you want to look at, whether it's produced by you know, in the U.S. or some of the other models, it's going to be smooth. You know, it's not going to have any boundaries between different neighboring weather service forecast offices, and that's you know, that's a plus that kind of get with you know, computer weather models. With the jagged nature that it still shows itself with the digital forecast from the Weather Service, back when the numerical weather processing wasn't that good yet, you know, the value was still, you know, a lower level. You could probably make the case, you know, that this is sort of the price you pay for having humans involved, adding value, et cetera, et cetera. But that gap between the humans adding value and the numerical weather prediction is narrowing, you know, and that jagged look just doesn't play well, you know, if you're looking at it on a computer screen or even on your phone, you know, tablet or your phone, and you're looking at a map. And so, you know, a lot of weather apps don't display, you know, that you know, the Weather Service digital forecast database. So, you know, a lot of them are, you know, if you're looking at some weather field, temperature, humidity, wind, you know, it's probably coming from a computer model or a blend of models, you know, that which is shown to have quite a bit of value. So I think that's the big challenge, the growing challenge for the Weather Service, is that they really do have to, on a recent tweet on the topic, somebody else posted a snowfall map for this recent, you know, relatively minor event we had here in the Northeast and the kind of, you know, back into the Midwest, you know, but you could clearly see you know, a number of Weather Service office boundary outlines in the snow forecast. And my response, you know, on Twitter was, you know, collaborate or else. You know, I think we're getting to the point where that kind of stuff I would never say it was acceptable, but, you know, in terms of problems you had to deal with, there were bigger fish to fry. But this is not becoming a growing problem because people can get a nearly as good product, or in some cases maybe as good a product from a computer model, and not have those jagged boundaries to try to figure out why those are there or how that impacts, you know, what they're going to do. So I do think, you know, this would be a case where I agree with the Weather Service management. They have, you know, Louis Cellini and the other folks, you know, working with him have been very clear that they want to see better collaboration and more consistent, you know, information produced in the digital forecast database. You can still see that, you know, there's a ways to go, you know, when you look at current operational products. And so I would agree that needs to go away, you know, that those jagged boundaries need to go away as quickly as possible, and to have an acceptable product for the general public, but also for key decision makers. It can be very frustrating for state officials that have more than one Weather Service office serving their jurisdiction, and you got one county that's got 2 inches of snow, and then the next county adjacent to it has 6 inches of snow, and there's no meteorological reason for it. It's just something that happened, you know, in the process of putting together the forecast. So those need to go away or stop, you know, in my opinion, because it's just, they've become now a bigger, you know, now they've become a bigger fish, you know, they now have become one of the bigger issues that have to be dealt with. So we'll see what happens. The operational workforce analysis there, you know, may suggest some ways to address that. You know, the Weather Service Employees Organization posted a PowerPoint, you know, that allegedly was, you know, briefed to senior people in commerce, and there's some solutions in there, regarding how forecast and warning responsibility is handled. So, we'll see.
Yeah, I'm sure that since that came out, I'm sure it's changed a lot since then, but do you think there's going to be some centralization as part of that? Gary, that would be a solution to the collaboration problem.
Well, it is. It's, makes a lot of people nervous because they think that's, means the end of their job or, the end of their office. And, I think the point is that, you have to keep changing. The Weather Service has changed before. It needs to change again. If you don't like this version of change, come up with something else, And I think Weather Service management would argue, tell us, or, back when they were kind of gathering information for the operational workforce analysis, they were inviting people to tell them, what they wanted. So I think a lot of people wanted the status quo, and unfortunately that was probably the one thing that wasn't really on the table. And probably the next best thing was, or maybe tied, maybe it's like 1A and 1B is, well, give us more people, give us more money, and leave the offices where they are, and, we'll make everything work. And that's the easy solution. And, it didn't happen with this administration. I don't think it's going to happen with the next administration. So to the extent I have a crystal ball, that would be, or magic 8-ball says, very unlikely. It's not. So it's more going to be how we reallocate what we've got, and that's that neutral phrase, turns into some real life things where either offices staffing levels change or duties change, and that will be a tough discussion and some tough decisions.
So we know that the incoming administration is not very union friendly. Gary, does that create some tremors in the workforce?
I don't know. Again, I'm out, but we saw this before. I mean, things that this is really getting into the weeds, but things like executive orders are things that the president does. The current administration did that. Previous administrations did that. So I saw, and again, I've been doing the management thing for, almost for around 2 decades. And so, I saw, in the Clinton administration, there was some stuff that they had in place, and it changed when the Bush administration took office because some executive orders were canceled or issued, with different instructions in terms of labor management relations. And then you saw a change again when it went from the Bush administration to the Obama administration. So that's kind of to be expected. It might even have changed. I think every administration changes things, but particularly when you have a change of parties along with it, which comes along with kind of a change of philosophies, including, labor management relations. Yeah, things that are an executive order can be changed. And I would be shocked if it didn't change, when the new administration took office. How it'll manifest itself, I don't know. There's some laws in place that would have to be changed, through Congress to fundamentally change some of the roles of, say, a union in the federal workforce or an employees organization in the federal workforce. But there's other things that can be changed, just by the president and the stroke of a pen. So we'll see. We'll see what happens.
So we hear constantly now that IDSS is valued and is a good thing. Are there any downsides to this IDSS idea, Gary, being a greater focus?
Well, obviously, you're going to get pulled away a little bit from day-to-day forecasting to some degree. If you do more of that, you have to do less of something else. You're not given any other resources. The other thing, as I said, it depends how we do IDSS. I haven't, I think it's been pretty clear, I was very displeased with sort of the decision-making process that New York City went through during Sandy, and that was during the Mayor Bloomberg era. I was, quite critical of their decision-making process. And they had full tilt, IDSS going on there. There were people from the Weather Service office out on Long Island who were detailed and were actually in the EOC, Emergency Operations Center for New York City. And they were getting, some detailed information and some information focused on New York City. So the thing is, if, you're going to do this, there's you're going to get it, you're going to have meteorologists deployed into working with a bunch of emergency managers. you have to be listened to, and the information has to be leveraged. So that to me is kind of the downside of IDSS. It can't just be we show up. It has to be we show up, communicate effectively, and it actually results in a better decision-making process or a better end result. And there's examples. You'll hear success stories. Those are repeated pretty frequently. But for me, New York City during Sandy, that decision to hold back on evacuations for 24 hours. New Jersey, Governor of New Jersey, Governor of Delaware called for evacuations, and New York City didn't, and they waited a whole another 24 hours before they did. And that caused a lot of problems. There was a scramble, sort of with they lost some time there in terms of making some decisions and getting some evacuations underway. So IDSS, I think, is a good thing, but I think the downside can be, one that you're, not listened to, or it's not leveraged properly. And I also worry about how it's being conveyed. I do think there's a lot of scatter out there right now. How Office A in the Weather Service does IDSS is not necessarily very similar to how Office B does it or Office C does it, including their behaviors in the EOC. So I think the downside could be that we don't spread sort of a best practices way of doing things. We kind of let people just kind of fend for themselves. That would be the other downside. So I'll stop there.
So take us back to Sandy for a minute, Gary. There was a lot of controversy about the Weather Service rules about, dropping the tropical designation, et cetera. Talk about what impact that had, and talk about how the Weather Service changed that after Sandy.
Right. Well, and I want to, I'll take ownership here. If you're looking for somebody who pushed that hard, you're talking to them right now. That I believed back then, I was already making the transition that we needed to focus on impacts and not so much on labels. And what we didn't want, we've had, and actually you can see it in some previous service assessments for the Weather Service, is that if you transition from a hurricane warning to something that's not a hurricane warning, we saw it during Irene, actually, the year before Sandy, that people misinterpret. So, it's good now that there's now rules in place where even if it's no longer really technically a hurricane, we still keep hurricane warnings up if there's hurricane force winds. So that's fine now as a rule. Back then we didn't have that option. And I would encourage us not to change labels any more than we have to, because I think there's a risk every time we do that people misinterpret. So, and I'll wrap it there.
So Gary, do you think that contributed to New York City and Mayor Bloomberg's reticence on issuing the evacuation orders?
People have put those words in his mouth. I've never actually heard him say it or any of his closest advisors. No one in the senior levels of New York City leadership. I think if I would instead infer that they were doing the bad thing that like generals often do, is they fight the last war. I think they really thought Sandy was going to be Irene Part 2. And they were based, and the previous year, the storm surge forecast was high for Irene versus what actually occurred. And I think they were expecting that to happen again. And so when the storm surge forecast was actually accurate for Sandy, two bad things happened with Sandy. First of all, the storm surge was forecast to be higher with Sandy than it was with Irene. And secondly, we actually got what was forecast with Sandy, as opposed to missing the mark on the low side, which it did during Irene. I think they were fighting the last battle. Now, they didn't say that either, but I think that's, if you want to, because again, I'll just turn around and say, well, Governor Christie of New Jersey, Governor Markell of Delaware, they were playing by the same rules. They were not being told, okay, look, technically this won't be a hurricane when this arrives, but here's all the impacts that you should be worried about. Don't focus on the name change. Don't focus on the label change. Focus on the impacts, and here's what the impacts are. And they called evacuations. So they made the right decision with the same information set. So if Mayor Bloomberg actually would come out and say, yeah, it was because of the hurricane, label, that confused me, but I'd say, okay, he's finally said it. But he's not ever said it. I've scrubbed the literature, I've looked, if there's an article that talks about it, I read it, and it's certainly been a lot of discussion about it. And a lot of people, including some of the Weather Enterprise, have put those words in his mouth, said that's why he did what he did. But I'd like him to say, I'm a big fan of, he's a big boy, he's an adult. He can say why he did what he did, if he is so inclined. He hasn't done so. So
he's busy counting his money. So, this is probably a good place to stop and let Gary have a break. He's been talking for over an hour, Aubrey. This is great stuff. So
it was great stuff. I didn't want to interrupt.
You won't get an email jingle out of me, but you'll get an introduction.
No music? All right, that's all right. All right, I can cope. Let's see. Let's go back to a note from Michael Hansen. This is from December 5th, so the pattern's changed since then. But Michael wrote in on December 5th, it was the 696th consecutive day where the official temperature in Billings, Montana hasn't gone below 0. The last time was January 10th, 2015, and that changed shortly afterwards. He said tonight or tomorrow, so that would be the 6th or the 7th. But that's an interesting weather fact.
Well, since we don't have a buzzer, Aubrey, this might be a good time to ask Gary what he thinks about climate change and et cetera stuff.
We're buzzer free tonight.
So, well, I'm with the group that, says, yeah, something's going on, it's changing, and humans have impacts. I think we're still working to figure out how it changes. Some things are more obvious than others. I see discussion back and forth regarding extreme weather events, like where we get more hurricanes, or we get more, higher category, hurricanes. You see even things about tornadoes and other stuff. But to me, it's clear that there's impacts. One of the things I did really when I first got here, actually, the first year I was here, so I worked with the city of Philadelphia because they wanted to revamp their excessive heat program. And they did really great work to deal with, heat waves in the city of Philadelphia, and continue to do so. And that goes back goes back 20 years. But I think that's one of the things where the fingerprint's pretty clear. You go back and you see these longer periods of time, particularly when you look at heat index. It's the combination of heat and humidity. People will go back and find some temperature records. Maybe they're back during the Dust Bowl days. But I think you're seeing, particularly in the urban areas, more prolonged periods of, very high to extreme heat index values, the combination of both the heat and the humidity that has a direct impact on population. So yeah, I'm comfortable with it. I do get a little uncomfortable with some of the language really on either side of the argument. I occasionally feel like we're advocating everyone to go back to like horse and buggy days. We can't emit any hydrocarbons from any tailpipe of a car, and I'm like, no, we can't. One of the things I said, someone who was kind of discussing with me a little bit, I said, look, when I call 911 because my wife has got these crushing chest pains, and she's scared and I'm scared, I don't want Doc showing up riding on a horse, riding up in a half hour saying, yep, she's had a heart attack, she's gone. I want the ambulance to show up, and if it, around here an ambulance will show up in 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 minutes. I want it to show up, and I want them to burn gas and emit hydrocarbons to get here and save her life. I'm sorry, So that's been actually a source of disagreement. I think some people, want even that to go away, and until we discover some better ways to do that with perhaps emitting less, greenhouse gases. But I don't see us going back to some more rustic lifestyle. So anyway.
I don't think I could adjust to that. All right. Thank you for your input. That was great. So, all right, let's go to Jane Britt sent us a lovely email. She is a fan of ours from Australia, and she loves the podcast. She's had a fascination with weather since childhood, especially tornadoes, and asked for a recommendation on some books. And Rick was very gracious to recommend several books. Maybe we can put these on the website. I'll forward this email back, and we can put some of these on. So one is the Tornado. One is Tornado Alley, Monster Storms of the Great Plains, Storm Warning, severe convective storms and tornadoes. Of course, what stands in a storm from Kim Cross, and then he also listed some websites. So I love hearing everyone's book suggestions. So those are great. So we'll go ahead and put those on the website. Art Reed sent us an email, and Art is from close to my neck of the woods, Brunswick, Maryland, kind of a little ways west of DC, but at least in my general vicinity. Art said, I searched for weather podcasts in 2012, and we were the only one, and was hooked. And Art would like to hear from Tim Marshall. Possibly he's already been on the show, but would like to hear more of him. And he's written about some things about school construction in North Texas from the tornadoes after Christmas last year. So it might be a good fit. So thank you for that. And let's see, Andy Baker, speaking of climate change, since we have no bell, Andy Baker sent us a post from Weather Underground today saying climate change won't stop in 2016 despite misleading reports. And Andrew thinks tracking this is important. That will get the double buzzer for tonight if we had the buzzer. So thanks for forwarding that link. And then also Nate's news. Did I kind of come in the middle of this talking about the bill that was killed last week?
You did.
Okay, I thought I heard part of it.
But ask away or comment away.
The Capital Weather, the article is from the Capital Weather Gang. A decades-long tri-state water war killed a bipartisan weather bill last week. Some would say kind of half quietly. So that was just the email forwarding on the link. I got through most of it, then I got down to the water stuff.
And you wouldn't think that the water war would have come between Georgia, Alabama, and Florida, but having lived through our flash drought this summer where I'm paying 500% for water, I can see why.
Yeah. All right. So if you have an email, you can send it to email@weatherbrains.com. We want to hear your guest suggestions, what you like about the show, maybe a show topic idea that we haven't thought of yet. We'd love to get those ideas. If you find some really interesting articles, pictures, you can pass those on email@weatherbrains.com. Don't forget to follow us on the Twitter, search for WeatherBrains, and also the Facebook, search for WeatherBrains. And also on Twitter is our link to the Teespring website where you can get your second generation WeatherBrains super soft, super snazzy, super comfortable shirt or hoodie.
We don't usually sound like an NPR pledge for donation drive or something, Gary, but we're doing that this week because we
need like a QVC clock up saying you've only got so much time to order.
Yeah, that would work. I don't know why
You've got 3 days and 2 hours.
They make you hurry. Get that Christmas shopping done early. You know, it's interesting to me that we don't say how many shopping days there are on Christmas anymore, I guess, because they're all shopping days now. But
that's right.
When I was a kid, the front page of the newspaper said 14 shopping days for Christmas. So that's changed. Yeah, I have to comment, Aubrey. Tim Marshall is going to be at our local Central Alabama NWA chapter meeting in late January. So we're really excited about that. I wish we could get him on the show, but I think he's coming in on Tuesday. If we could get him to come in on Monday, it would be great. We haven't had him on the show in a while. I thought it was interesting yesterday to see Marshall Shepard and the Weather Geeks had Mary McCarty, the EPA administrator, and I thought she did a fantastic job. Did you happen to catch that, Gary?
Mine's recorded. I didn't watch it yet.
Well, you'll love it. She's really good. You didn't get to see it, Gary?
I didn't get to see it, no.
I thought she did a great job. She's the outgoing EPA administrator, and she addressed a lot of issues and talked about the history of the EPA and being signed under President Nixon. And of course, back then we could not only breathe our air, we could generally eat it too. And a lot of great things have happened because of that organization. And,
and I believe he was hoping. I saw him post about how the topic he was having, and I believe he's hoping to have the incoming EPA director on. Correct?
Who's from Oklahoma, I believe, right? Okay. Is that right?
I thought I saw the invite go out. I'm not sure if it's been responded to or not, but I thought I saw the invitation extended.
Well, back to a little weather geekery for a minute, Gary. Talk about Hurricane Matthew, and you've studied that closely, and you've tweeted about it vocally over the last few weeks. Talk about that hurricane.
Yeah, well, it's that one was interesting to me because it was another high impact event. So you had the impact on the population, and again, the things we focus on or the things that people anticipate based on what we say versus what actually happened. I think there was a gap that opened up, in North Carolina with the amount of inland river flooding. I think the weather community could say, hey, we forecasted correctly, but I think there was some surprise and consternation on the part of the folks who went through it that it was actually as bad as it was. And so so there's a communication, I think there's a communication message there in terms of how we're communicating and how we could have maybe handled that differently, and potentially better. The other thing during Matthew, I found interesting, obviously there were some tracks that brought it just inland over Florida, and it wound up, the center of the storm wound up, just offshore. But the differences, were in the tens of miles, and given how far out that was in time, that was well, within sort of the average, it was above average, from some of the metrics in terms of the accuracy. And yet, so this would be one where I'd say, well, we did pretty good, but obviously it's always a little hair-raising when a hurricane is paralleling the coast or, threatening to come ashore. But, I saw people even within the weather enterprise, kind of lamenting about how we need, even a more accurate forecast. If only I'd, looked at this product or given more weight to this model, we could have had even a better forecast. And and I'm just to me, I'm like, really, you think you could have done that, And so to me, I saw some people label it as a bad forecast, and I don't think it was, but I'll adapt it and I'll take that label just in the sense of saying, if I was going to put together a presentation, I haven't yet, but perhaps I will. It would be like, when a bad forecast is still more than good enough. This goes back again to the idea that we can't make weather forecasting perfect. So, if it's really good, you need to be fully leveraging it, to the extent you can. You can't be lamenting the fact that it's not perfect. If a hurricane, is paralleling the coast, there's no, that's not a good news story. There's no happy, there's no happy angle here. And the question is just really, how bad is it going to be? And yet there's some people who are like, hey, I evacuated, I didn't need to because, it didn't come ashore, like I said I was going to. And so next time I'm not going to. And that's, that's a terrible decision. So to me, the whole risk analysis thing, I don't want to trivialize when people make an evacuation decision, because that's a tough decision to make a lot of times, to evacuate. It's expensive and sometimes emotionally difficult too. So, it's not an easy decision to make, but yeah, it's more like, I don't think there's a quantum leap. The track forecast with hurricanes is something we've gotten really good at, better at than intensity forecasting. So if there's going to be some ugly surprises, it's more likely to be with the intensity side of things rather than the track side of things. So rather than saying, gee, a really good track forecast needs to be even better, I think we need to kind of say why are we uncomfortable making difficult decisions in these situations. If I told you there was like a 10% chance your car would burst into flames when you tried to turn it on in the morning, would you say, oh, the odds are in my favor, off we go? I think most people would be like, whoa, Nelly, where's the lawyer? And yet we tell people there's a 10% chance of hurricane force winds, and then they evacuate, they don't get it. And they're like, oh, those weathermen, I wish I could have a job where I'm wrong, most of the time I still get paid, blah, 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 So I'm just like, now, wait a second, so there's different risk analysis, if you told people there's a 10% chance of other things, they'd be like, scared, really badly, and then, but with weather, and, it wasn't like there wasn't a hurricane, it was actually a hurricane, it was out there, you could see it, there was actually weather that was associated with it, it wasn't like, so I'm sorry, so the level of expectations or the level of, how people react as from a societal standpoint is interesting, looking at the risk analysis, that the threat of a hurricane and the threat of your car blowing up don't seem to be generating sort of the same emotional response. And yet it could be, in both cases, people lost their lives during Irene, people lost their lives during Sandy. It's not people lost their lives during Matthew. It's not like it isn't a threat. So, but yet the way people behave is interesting to me, because it's not, we don't get the reaction we would expect in a lot of cases. And yet you can look at other situations where people would probably be like, whoa, back off, this is dangerous, beep, 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 back up, so that to me is like a couple of things I took away from Matthew. I think there's still a lot of work, to be done on the whole communication thing and understanding why people do what they do. Not just, I'm sure people would love to understand that, and not just weather, there's some other fields.
I don't mean to interrupt, but is it concerning because it seems like after Matthew, especially in Georgia, that a lot of people kind of regretted evacuating. And so what's the thought kind of moving forward? Should there, obviously there's going to be another big event with how people are maybe evacuating in the future after Matthew.
Yeah, and that's an excellent question. Yeah, I don't know exactly what the answer is other than to keep hitting away at it. There was clearly some people who didn't evacuate during Sandy, and they referenced Irene. So up here in this neck of the woods, and Irene was just the year before Sandy. So yeah, this is a behavior where people, when we talk about storm surge, flooding, and we talk about 90-mile-an-hour winds or whatever, they expect to personally experience it exactly at their location. Whereas we're trying to forecast sort of a threat, matrix or a threat area, and say, this is the area that could be affected. And yeah, but yet if there was a threat, like I use the car, engine, going into flames, violence in the workplace or at school, if people become aware of that threat, they react very strongly to it, even if sometimes it doesn't even manifest itself. They just hear a rumor, or maybe there is actually a threat, but there's no actual follow-up. And people will take those very seriously. And yet, with a hurricane, they're like, well, I evacuated once, and it didn't happen, so I'm not going to do it again. I don't know what the answer is. I do think some people are asking those kinds of questions. I think we need to ask more of those type of questions and see what the answer is. I think folks in TV, you get a lot of that's in the communication realm, and there's a lot of feedback, back and forth. I know there's a lot of constraints, over what you can say and how you can say it, but it is, we've got a lot of tools, I think, in terms of gathering the information and understanding how we can, be better communicators, better scientists and better communicators. I think we need to do both. So, but yeah, I don't know what the answer is, hope that folks take it seriously the next time. I think sometimes it gets better. If a couple of years elapse before the threat, reoccurs, I think they let go of some of that. I think it could be some of that anger thing I talked about, when I talked about the apology, for the winter storm event. I think people are angry that they sort of evacuated needlessly, and I think that drives some of that commentary. So ways which we can address and perhaps dissipate the anger may be ways in which we can get be more comfortable with how we see people behaving to future threats. Maybe
it would be nice if they thought, oh, thank God I evacuated. Worst case scenario, we would have been safe.
That is a way to look at it. I do think probably some people look at that. We hear the ones who don't, but I think there is to me, an alarmingly large number of people who don't react that way, sort of like, or rather don't react that way and look at it instead as a burden as opposed to, a prudent behavior. So,
Aubrey, do you want to give a pick before you have to go?
Yes, my quick pick is, it was something with lake effect, wasn't it?
Something about winter that wasn't related to weather.
Oh, it was the penguins. It was the penguins dressed up as Santa in Japan. It's not really a weather thing, but come on, 'tis the season, and it's just a super cute video. How can you resist those little guys dressed up as Santa Claus?
And I told Gary it had to be weather related, Aubrey. Come on.
It's winter related. Mine's winter related. Come on, mine are usually pretty good though.
All right. Well,
I've got to go get ready for show, guys. Great show. Good conversation, Gary. It was good seeing you again.
Yeah, it's great seeing you.
So Gary, what are you up to these days?
Been kind of enjoying the world and the weather. I'm kind of reverting back to where I enjoyed weather, where I enjoyed a snowstorm, so to speak, a little bit more, before my weather service career. Obviously I was much younger, but I don't worry about staffing and how does the forecast look like it's on track, so stuff like that. My wife and I have been doing more travel. I have a granddaughter, so I see her a couple times a month. I'm actually doing babysitting duty. She's 18 months old, so it's more like toddler control duty now. But so doing more, actually, spending more time with family and doing that. Still involved. I made reference. I mean, I went to the AMS conference, Broadcast Meteorology Conference down in Austin back in the summer, and then I went to the NWA conference in Norfolk, and I presented at both of those, actually very similar presentations. I am going to be out at AMS Seattle here coming up next month. I'm not presenting. I'm just kind of going to enjoy the venue and do a lot of listening, do some maybe talking in between sessions. So getting to do, I used to have to, when I was at the Weather Service, you always had to go through the process of getting your travel approved and getting the Mother May Eyes to go to a conference. And there were a couple of years, I think there were a couple of years where things got short-circuited. There was one NWA conference that no one went to from the Weather Service because of budget issues. So it's kind of nice to be able just to say, I'm going. I'm going and doing my own thing. So I'm doing that, and other organizations. There's an emergency preparedness conference, emergency management conference in New Jersey. I'm involved with the planning for that. That's coming up in May of 2017. So between doing family stuff and weather-related stuff, sort of more on a volunteer basis, it's enough to keep me occupied enough. Let's put it that way. So.
Well, we hope you'll be at the NWA meeting in Anaheim in September.
I am planning to attend that also. That's right now. I haven't made, I don't think there's too much out yet about that, but I do have it marked on the calendar. I'm hoping to do that. So.
Yeah, the call for abstracts will be going out here in less than a month. So.
Okay. All right. I'll have
to believe the cycle has begun again.
I know. It never stops. So.
It never seems to. That's right. So how can folks get in touch with you, Gary, and follow you?
Well, I'm on Twitter. I got my Twitter account, and that's based on my name. So just put Gary Szatkowski together. You get at Gary Szatkowski. You'll get me on Twitter. And I'm on. I've got if they want to get hold of me via email, they're welcome to do that. My email account is based on my name. It's GarySzat11@gmail.com. They can send me an email if they want to chat about something or interact. That's fine.
And if you spell Gary's complete last name, you get bonus points.
That's right.
So what's your pick of the night? Pick of the week, Gary?
Well, actually, I was going. I looked. I didn't really fold it into the discussion, but one of the counties that was hardest hit during Sandy was Monmouth County. That's the northernmost of the counties along the Atlantic shore, Jersey Shore, and they've been doing. I worked with them there about the past year while I was with the Weather Service on something called Know Your Zone. They've gone with the flow, so to speak. A lot of the maps regarding coastal flooding still were kind of tied to intensity of the hurricane and stuff like that. And so they've got a website, and it's kind of cumbersome, so I'll probably send it to you to maybe post. I don't know if that's the easiest way. Or I can read it out loud here. You want me to go through it reol quick?
Yeah, sure.
Okay.
It's just girls left now.
It's www.mcs.org/knowyourzone. And that stands for Monmouth County Sheriff's Office in New Jersey, and that's where the emergency management is. But they basically got 4 zones. They use some high-end GIS technology, and they've got 4 zones. They've got a Google map that you can look at, that you can zoom in on and get all the way down to the street level. They've got handouts. They basically, and they're prepared. So they've got a very nice sort of high-end storm surge coastal flooding tool. And the thing is, they're typically in New Jersey that's been associated with hurricanes, but they're prepared to use it for higher end nor'easters. So. That's the other thing that's kind of new with this, is that they've got some bells and whistles here now, where if it looks like it's going to be a bad enough coastal storm during the winter season, they could actually call for some evacuations. And what they did, and as people are saying, well, how's this different from before? If anyone has some familiarity with New Jersey, kind of the major highway, there's a couple of major highways that run kind of north and south, and one close to the coast is the Garden State Parkway. And back during Sandy, they were just telling people, well, if you're east of the Garden State Parkway, you should evacuate. Well, that, or if you flooded before, you should evacuate. Was another piece of the guidance. And people are like, well, I'm not familiar, I've moved to this area like in the last 10 years, so I don't know historically what, the flooding is. And, evacuating east of the Garden State Parkway up in Monmouth County means like you just told about 500,000 people to evacuate. You probably don't want to do that. That's probably overkill. So now they've got a lot more granularity regarding the places that need to evacuate, and maps to go with it, and then guidance to go with it. There's handouts, to tell you, if you're in zone A and you're told to evacuate, there's something you can click on that tells you what you should do, what you should bring with you, stuff like that. So very nice. Just got deployed this summer. I was chatting with them about it for the past year before I retired, and then they deployed it this summer, and we'll see what happens.
Well, that's exciting. So some good has come out of Hurricane Sandy for those folks. It sounds like.
Yeah, I think there are a lot. There are people who are working hard on lessons learned. It's good to see. There's some people who are bound and determined to do things differently and hopefully better next time, and I think they will.
That's great news. So I'm going to use as my pick of the week all the guests that are coming up the next few weeks. Since I don't have Span here to give me the foghorn, since I don't have a pick tonight. But next Monday night, we'll be talking to Gary Szatkowski from Kansas City, and he'll be sharing his thoughts on the upcoming winter using his index. And he also has a new kids book out. Greg Carbon will join us on the 21st. That's going to be a Wednesday night recording. That show will be released into the wild on Monday the 26th. But, of course, Greg always shares the last couple of entries to his top 10 big weather events of the year. So we'll record that show at a special time. That's Wednesday the 21st at 7 o'clock, so we can get Greg out the door a little earlier. On Tuesday, January 3rd, we'll come back into 2017 with Kevin Laws and Dr. Laura Myers talking about some of the work that the National Weather Service in Birmingham has continued to do, and some of the social science things that we talked about tonight. Always nice to have Dr. Myers with us. And I got a really cool book from the AMS. William Haggard wrote a book about weather in the courtroom, and they sent me a copy of it, and he's going to join us on Wednesday, January the 16th. So looking forward to all those guests coming up. Of course, WeatherBrains is the weekly netcast that's all about weather. We used to say that we were the only netcast about weather, but now we can't say that anymore. So we'll say we're the longest running weather podcast out there. We've been doing this almost 11 years on Monday nights. That's generally when we record, unless we have a special need like James's vacations and things like that. That happens about 3 or 4 times a year. But we really enjoyed having Gary Szatkowski with us tonight, and we appreciate you being with us, Gary, here right before the holidays.
Thank you very much. Really appreciate the opportunity.
Well, you're welcome back anytime, Gary. We have a standing invitation for you, and you came very close to breaking the record for the most minutes spoken during the show tonight. So we thank you for that engagement. It's been fun.
All right.
Nate said that it was going to be a lit show, and I think we may have lived up to that designation. So, but until next Monday night, when Gary Szatkowski will be our guest weather brain, I'm Bill Murray for the whole WeatherBrains panel. Hope you have a great week, and we'll see you Monday night. Thanks, and have a great week. But Gary, that was outstanding. Thank you.
All right. Thank you.
Hope the checks keep coming.
All right. Me too. Thank you. Thanks for the opportunity.
All right. Yell at us anytime.
All right.
All right. Bye.
Wow, and there's still people watching. Okay, so that was kind of exciting. Turn the lights back on. Ooh. So, yeah, I do that once a year. One time a year, we do a live remote at the late news away from the station, and it's the night of the Toys for Tots marathon, which was tonight. So we were about 10 minutes away, not too far, but that's the reason I had to leave early, and I'm coming back late. So thank you all for watching. Gary was a great guest. And yeah, I want to go back and listen to the whole show again because I was having to do some things and to get a chance to hear the whole thing. But anyway, he was great tonight. So thank you guys for watching. We will be on at the regular time next week on the 19th. And then we're going to do a Wednesday special next week. And that will be with Greg Carbon. That'll be on the 21st. That'll be our year-ender. And Greg will go through the top weather events of 2016 as he's done for many, many years here. Greg, of course, for a long time was the WCM at the Storm Prediction Center. Now Patrick Marsh has that job. Greg is up in at the headquarters in Maryland. So anyway, Monday and Wednesday shows next week. So we'll see you guys then. Thank you all for watching. Have a great week, and God bless. Bye.